Claire Miller traced the line on the chart again, her breath catching in her throat. Unchanged for 2 weeks, the heavy sedative dosage keeping millionaire Alexander Vance locked in silence in his private suite hadn't been questioned, let alone reduced. Her eyes darted towards the hallway, recalling his stepmother's chillingly polite warning. Just yesterday, we wouldn't want anyone becoming overly involved Nurse Miller. It could lead to complications. A cold dread snaked down Claire's spine. This wasn't recovery care. This felt like containment. And the chilling realization dawned, discovering the truth behind this powerful family's secret might cost her far more than just her nursing license. If this story has already gripped your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. Leave a comment with your thoughts and make sure you subscribe to Fanciko Stories so you don't miss how this unfolds. The air in the private hospital suite smelled sterile, sharp with antiseptic, yet underneath a faint, almost imperceptible scent lingered. The smell of old money clinging stubbornly to the custom-milled fixtures and imported linens. Everything was white, blindingly white. White walls absorbed the weak afternoon light, filtering through drawn white blinds. White sheets lay smooth and undisturbed over the high-tech bed. White silence, thick and heavy, filled the space, broken only by the rhythmic electronic sigh of a ventilator and the soft beep of a cardiac monitor. At the center of this stark white world lay Alexander Vance, 33 years old, heir to the sprawling Vance hotel empire, a man whose name typically appeared on magazine covers and shareholder reports, now reduced to stillness. He hadn't moved, not voluntarily, in 10 days. A thin, fading scar just above his temple was the only visible mark of the violent crash on a rain-slicked highway, a twisted guardrail, a flipped luxury sedan, a life nearly extinguished. Or so the world and the meticulously curated medical reports insisted, but beneath the mask of serene unconsciousness, Alexander Vance was awake, acutely, agonizingly awake. His body was a prison unresponsive for now, but his mind raced sharp and analytical as ever. He replayed the fragments, the sudden urgent need for that late-night drive, the strange sluggishness of the car's brakes, the blinding headlights from nowhere. An accident, perhaps. But Alexander had learned long ago, navigating the gilded cage of his inheritance, that very few things at his level of wealth and influence happened purely by accident. The weight of the Vance legacy, the constant pressure the faces that smiled while their eyes calculated. It had taught him suspicion as a second language. He just hadn't expected the threat to come so close, so violently. Muffled voices seeped through the thick, sound-resistant glass of the suite door, jarring him from his thoughts. He strained to listen, filtering out the hospital hum. "I'm telling you, Eleanor, this is our window," Marcus Thorne's voice. Slick, impatient, always carrying an edge of petulant entitlement. Alexander pictured his cousin, impeccably dressed, probably adjusting his silk tie, even as he plotted. The board is getting nervous. They whisper about contingency plans. If we don't make a decisive move, now assert control while he's incapacitated. A pause, then a colder, smoother tone cut through Marcus's agitation. Eleanor Vance, his stepmother, always poised, always controlled her grief, as perfectly tailored as her designer suits. Decisive moves require patience. Marcus, not panic. We don't just step in. We consolidate. His assets are vulnerable, yes, but rushing creates suspicion. Suspicion. He could wake up tomorrow. Marcus hissed the sound, barely penetrating the door. Dr. Peterson assures me that's unlikely. And Mr. Finch. Eleanor's voice was like chipped ice. "Our loyal family attorney. He's been asking too many questions about the revised directives. Finch is manageable." Marcus scoffed, though Alexander could hear the underlying uncertainty. "He's just one man. One man with too much knowledge," Eleanor corrected coolly. "He needs to be sidelined, isolated. We continue reinforcing the narrative, a tragic, slow decline. We ensure the medical team remains compliant. Another few weeks, perhaps a month, and the transition will be seamless. Permanent." Alexander's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped within his still chest. So it wasn't just paranoia. It was real. The calculated coldness in Eleanor's voice confirmed his deepest fears. This wasn't just about corporate control. It felt darker, more final. He needed proof. He needed allies. But trapped in this silent white prison, he was utterly alone. The door opened with a soft hydraulic sigh. Footsteps entered, slower, lighter than the impatient shuffle of Marcus or the measured click of Eleanor's heels. Different Alexander risked opening his eyes just a fraction, a sliver of vision beneath heavy lids. A young woman stood near the doorway, consulting a chart, nurse's uniform, practical shoes. Her movements were efficient, professional, but without the detached coldness he'd sensed from some of the other staff, Claire Miller, according to the brief handover he'd overheard earlier. She was replacing the previous nurse who had abruptly resigned, another detail that now seemed suspicious. "Good afternoon, Mr. Vance," she said softly, her voice clear but gentle. No cloying sweetness, no false pity. It was simply, "Calm, it's just me. Clear time for your checks." She moved around the bed, her presence strangely soothing despite the turmoil raging within him. She checked his vitals, noted readings on the chart, adjusted a tube with practiced hands. Her touch when she brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead was professional, yet present, not dismissive. She looked at him, truly looked, even though she believed him unaware. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not pity, perhaps empathy, and something else. A weariness that seemed deeper than just the end of a long shift. He watched her through slitted eyes as she moved, tidying the already immaculate room. She didn't hum mindless tunes or chat inanely to fill the silence. She worked with quiet focus, but her gaze occasionally drifted towards his still form, a slight frown creasing her brow, as if puzzled by the sterile perfection of it all. As she prepared to leave, she paused by the door, hesitated. She glanced back at him, then down at the chart in her hand, conflict briefly shadowing her features. It was the look of someone paid well to follow orders, yet whose instincts were whispering a different story. A quiet internal battle flickered in her eyes before she seemed to force it down, smoothing her professional mask back into place. With a quiet, "I'll be back later," she slipped out the door, sighing shut behind her, leaving Alexander Vance alone once more in the suffocating white silence, his mind already latching on to that flicker of doubt he'd seen in the new nurse's eyes. It was a minuscule thing, almost nothing. But in his current state, almost nothing felt like a sliver of hope, and hope was something he desperately needed. The pristine white room began to feel less like a sanctuary, and more like a stage set meticulously arranged, but lacking genuine substance. As days bled into a week, then nearly two, Claire Miller's initial unease solidified into a chilling certainty. Something was profoundly wrong with the care, or lack thereof, being provided to Alexander Vance. It started with the IV drip, the same low-level sedative day after day, standard protocol for an initial trauma patient, perhaps, But Alexander showed no signs of agitation, no seizures, no spikes in intracranial pressure that would warrant continued heavy sedation without review. His vitals were stable, almost unnaturally so, yet the dosage remained untouched, unquestioned. Then came the missing therapies. The physical therapist scheduled thrice weekly to prevent muscle atrophy hadn't appeared once since Claire started. When she inquired, a harried floor supervisor mumbled something about family preference and waiting for stabilization. Stabilization, he was stable now. The speech therapist, crucial for assessing potential cognitive recovery, was similarly absent. It was as if Alexander Vance was being deliberately kept in a state of suspended animation, his potential for recovery systematically ignored. Claire found herself meticulously reviewing his chart during quiet moments, comparing current readings with baseline data from his admission. Patterns emerged. Subtle discrepancies logged, but never flagged. Routine checks performed, but never truly evaluated. It wasn't overt neglect, not the kind born of carelessness or understaffing she'd sometimes witnessed elsewhere. This felt different, purposeful. Like a carefully orchestrated campaign of inaction, one afternoon, armed with specific observations, Claire sought out Dr. Peterson, the attending physician, whose appearances were becoming increasingly brief. She found him dictating notes outside another patient's room, his demeanor radiating impatience. Dr. Peterson, Claire began keeping her voice level and professional. I wanted to discuss Mr. Vance's sedation levels and the lack of physical therapy consults. His vitals have been consistently stable, and prolonged immobility carries significant risks. Dr. Peterson didn't even look up from his tablet. Nurse Miller, is it? Mr. Vance's care plan is set according to the family's wishes and my best medical judgment. He suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. Aggressive therapy is contraindicated at this stage, but Dr. Claire persisted gently. Standard protocols often involve gradual reduction of sedatives to assess neurological response, and passive range of motion exercises are usually initiated early. He finally looked at her, his eyes cold behind expensive frames. Are you questioning my judgment, nurse? The implication hung heavy in the air. His stepmother, Mrs. Vance, receives daily updates and is quite satisfied with his progress. I suggest you focus on executing the established orders. He turned away, dismissing her as effectively as if he'd waved a hand. Frustration burned in Claire's chest. It wasn't just the dismissal, it was the practiced ease with which her valid concerns were brushed aside, the casual mention of Eleanor Vance's satisfaction. That night, the silence in Alexander's room felt heavier than usual. The rhythmic beeping of the machines seemed to mock the stillness of the man in the bed. Claire went through her usual routines, checking monitors, adjusting pillows, bathing his skin. But tonight, her movements were fueled by a quiet anger. As she sat beside his bed, long after the night shift had settled into its quiet rhythm, she found herself speaking to him, her voice barely above a whisper. She knew logically he likely couldn't hear or understand, but the need to voice the growing dread inside her was overwhelming. I don't know if you can hear me, Mr. Vance, she began, her gaze fixed on his still profile. Maybe this is just for me. But I need to say it, she took a shaky breath. I became a nurse because I watched someone I loved fade away in a place like this. Not from their illness. Not really, but from indifference. From people just following orders, not asking questions because it was easier. Her voice cracked slightly, the old pain surfacing unexpectedly. My brother. He had a rare condition, complex. The doctors were busy, the specialists overloaded. Notes weren't always read carefully, Small changes were missed by the time anyone realized how serious it had become. She trailed off, swallowing hard. I promised myself. Then I wouldn't let that happen to anyone else, if I could help it. I wouldn't just be someone who clocks in and clocks out. She leaned forward slightly. This job, the pay is good. I need it. But it feels wrong here. They talk about you, like you're already gone. They keep you quiet, too quiet, and I don't think it's for your benefit. She rose and walked to the window, looking out at the distant city lights. I don't know what kind of power games your family is playing, but I won't be a pawn in them. Turning back, she retrieved a small, plain notebook from her bag, entirely separate from the official hospital charts. She opened it to a fresh page. So I'm keeping my own record, she murmured more to herself than to him. The real one. What I see. What I suspect. Maybe I'm crazy, but I have to. Just as she was finishing her notes, the door opened silently. Eleanor Vance stood there, radiating cool elegance. Even in the dim light, Claire's heart jumped. Had she heard? Still here? Nurse Miller. Eleanor's voice was smooth as silk, but her eyes were sharp, assessing such dedication. Just finishing up my rounds, Mrs. Vance. Claire replied, trying to keep her voice steady, closing the notebook discreetly. Eleanor glided further into the room, her gaze sweeping over her stepson, then settling back on Claire. Alexander requires rest, minimal stimulation. It's crucial for his recovery, Dr. Peterson explained. She paused, her smile not reaching her eyes. We wouldn't want anyone becoming overly attached, or perhaps overly involved in matters beyond their purview. It could lead to misunderstandings, complications. The unspoken threat was crystal clear. Just ensure he's comfortable. That's your primary role. Eleanor swept out as silently as she had entered, leaving a chill in her wake. Claire stood frozen for a moment, her resolve hardening into defiance. The warning hadn't scared her. It had confirmed her suspicions. They were actively suppressing his recovery. They saw her attentiveness not as good nursing, but as a potential problem. She walked back to Alexander's bedside. Her earlier anger replaced by a fierce protectiveness. She gently squeezed his unresponsive hand. "Okay, Mr. Vance," she whispered, her voice low but firm, with newfound determination. "Now I know I'm not crazy, and I promise you, whatever they're planning, I won't let them get away with it. I won't be part of it. You're not alone in here." As she finally turned to leave, a single glistening tear escaped the corner of Alexander Vance's closed eye and traced a silent path down his temple. He had heard, and for the first time since the crash, he didn't feel entirely alone. Claire's days settled into a strange, bifurcated rhythm to the outside world, to Eleanor Vance, whose visits remained brief, and chillingly polite to Marcus Thorne, whose occasional appearances were marked by impatient pacing and suspicious glances, and even to Dr. Peterson, who now barely acknowledged her. She was the model of quiet efficiency. She logged vitals, administered medications, adjusting nothing as ordered, and maintained the sterile perfection of the White Room. But in the stolen moments, usually late at night, when the hospital corridors hushed and the threat of interruption lessened, a different Claire emerged. This Claire spoke softly to the still man in the bed, reading aloud. Not from mindless magazines, but from worn paperbacks she brought from home. Stories of resilience, quiet courage, sometimes even tales of adventure from worlds far removed from this gilded cage. She performed subtle range-of-motion exercises on his limbs, masked as routine adjustments, whispering words of encouragement his conscious mind might grasp. She cleaned the faint scar on his temple with extra care, her touch gentle but firm. She did it partly out of defiance against Eleanor's veiled threats, partly because of the memory of her brother's fading light. But increasingly she did it for him, for the man she sensed was trapped within the unmoving form, the man whose single tear had felt like a silent plea. Still doubt gnawed at her. Was she projecting? Was that tear just an autonomic response? Weeks crept by with no further sign. The meticulous entries in her secret notebook piled up. Observations, suspicions, but no concrete proof of awareness. Discouragement began to settle like a cold weight in her chest. One evening, exhaustion tugging at her, she sank into the chair beside his bed. "Mr. Vance," she whispered, her voice thick with fatigue and fading hope. "Alexander, if you are in there, if you can hear me, please just give me something. Anything. A sign that I'm not just talking to myself in this lonely room." Silence answered, the steady rhythm of the machines, the low hum of the air conditioning. Claire sighed a deep, weary sound, shaking her head. "Maybe I am crazy," she mumbled, rubbing her temples. "Maybe Eleanor's right. I'm getting too involved, seeing things that aren't." Then she saw it. A flicker, barely perceptible, against the white sheet. His right index finger. It twitched. Once Claire froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her heart leapt, pounding against her ribs. Had she imagined it? She leaned closer, eyes wide, scarcely daring to breathe. Did you just move your finger?" She whispered, her voice trembling. Silence again. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought she'd hallucinated it out of sheer desperation. Then slowly, deliberately, the finger curled, just slightly but undeniably. A conscious movement. A choked sob escaped Claire's lips, quickly stifled behind her hand. Tears sprang to her eyes. Not tears of sadness this time, but of overwhelming relief and vindication. Oh my God. She breathed, sinking back into the chair, momentarily stunned. He was there. He had heard her all this time. She took a deep, shaky breath, wiping furiously at her eyes. "Okay, stay calm, don't spook him. Don't alert anyone." This changed everything. "Alexander," she said softly, leaning forward again, her voice low and urgent. "Okay, listen. We need a system. Can you understand me? One finger curl for yes, no movement for no. Can you do that? Curl your finger if you understand." A pause that stretched for an eternity. Then the slow, deliberate curl. A watery laugh bubbled up inside Claire. Okay, good, yes." She felt a giddy, almost hysterical sense of triumph, mixed with profound fear. This was real and incredibly dangerous. Their new communication began a painstakingly slow dialogue, conducted in the language of twitches and stillness. It was frustrating. Questions had to be simple, broken down into yes-no components. Answers came slowly, sometimes delayed by his weakness or the need for caution, when footsteps echoed nearby. There were moments of near absurdity. One night, trying to ascertain if he was uncomfortable, Claire embarked on a lengthy series of yes-no questions. Is it the pillow? Yes, no. Okay. Is the room too cold? Yes, no. The blanket too heavy? Yes, no, too light. Alexander remained still through the barrage. Finally, Claire threw her hands up in mock exasperation. "All right, Mr. Vance, I give up. Are you secretly just enjoying making me guess?" After a moment, his finger curled twice in rapid succession, a signal they hadn't established. Claire blinked. "Wait, 2 curls. What does that mean? Is that a maybe? Or stop asking silly questions?" She narrowed her eyes playfully. "Or perhaps it means Bring me the remote control. To her astonishment, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor shook his lips, the ghost of a smile. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, but Claire saw it. A shared spark of humor in their bizarre, high-stakes situation. She couldn't help but chuckle softly, shaking her head. Communicating with you is going to take years off my life. You know that. Through this slow, secret language, fragments of the real Alexander Vance began to emerge. He wasn't just the cold tycoon from the news reports. He confirmed her suspicions about the accident. He expressed frustration not just at his physical state, but at the gilded cage his life had become even before the crash. The endless expectations, the betrayals masked by polite smiles. He conveyed through simple yes-no responses to her careful questions, a deep weariness with power and a longing for something simpler, something real. He asked about her, too, showing genuine interest in her life, her dreams, the quiet strength he sensed in her. Claire, in turn, found herself opening up, sharing stories about her childhood, her passion for nursing, despite its heartbreaks, her belief in simple kindness. A fragile trust began to weave itself between them, strengthened by their shared secret and the palpable danger surrounding them. He was no longer just a patient. He was Alexander, her co-conspirator, her silent confidant. And she realized with a jolt, was becoming fiercely protective of him, her professional boundaries blurring with genuine care. Their clandestine communication sessions became the focal point of her shifts. Moments of connection snatched under the ever-present threat of discovery. That threat materialized late one afternoon. Claire was leaning close, patiently guiding Alexander through a series of blinks to spell out a crucial name when the door swung open without warning. Marcus Thorne stood there, his eyes immediately narrowing with suspicion as he took in the scene. Claire leaning intimately close to the supposedly comatose patient, her expression intent. Claire straightened up instantly, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Mr. Thorne," she said, striving for a calm. She didn't feel, "I was just checking Mr. Vance's pupillary response." It was a weak excuse, but the best she could manage on the spot. Marcus didn't look convinced. He strode further into the room, his gaze flicking between Claire's slightly flushed face and Alexander's still form. Really, he drawled, skepticism dripping from his voice. "He seems unchanged. Eleanor expects a full report on his status later. Ensure it's accurate." He lingered for another moment, his eyes sharp and assessing, before turning abruptly and leaving. The door clicked shut, leaving Claire trembling slightly, her hand instinctively going to Alexander's arm. He remained perfectly still, giving no outward sign, but she felt an almost imperceptible tension radiate from him. The near miss hung heavy in the air. They had been careless, complacent. Marcus was suspicious. How much had he seen? How much would he report back to Eleanor? The danger suddenly felt immediate, sharp, pressing in on them from all sides. Their fragile alliance, born in whispers and twitches, was now truly forged in shared peril. They had to be smarter, faster. They needed more than just communication. They needed proof, and they needed it before Marcus and Eleanor decided Claire Miller, the overly attentive nurse, was a liability that needed to be removed. The near discovery by Marcus Thorne shifted the atmosphere in the White Room from one of cautious hope to urgent vigilance. Every creak of the door, every unexpected footstep in the hallway sent a jolt of adrenaline through Claire. Their secret communication sessions became shorter, more focused, driven by a single pressing need: evidence. Hard evidence that would expose Eleanor and Marcus before they could finalize their plans. Proof Alexander signaled one night, his finger tapping weakly, but insistently, against Claire's palm, using their primitive code. Need. Proof. Claire nodded her mind, racing, I know. But how your room is monitored. Eleanor controls the staff access. Through painstaking blinks and finger curls, Alexander conveyed an idea. There was a small, rarely accessed panel in the ceiling corner, just above the locked medication refrigerator, where controlled substances were stored. He remembered it from when the suite was being customized years ago. It was discreet high enough to offer a vantage point, and close enough to where Eleanor sometimes took private calls or gave hushed instructions to senior night staff. If they could place a recording device there, it was incredibly risky. Getting the device, planting it unseen, retrieving it later. Each step was fraught with peril, but it was their only viable option. Claire reached out to an old friend from college, someone who worked in tech support, and owed her a significant favor. Explaining the situation in vague but urgent terms, she managed to borrow what she needed, a tiny pin-sized recording device, motion-activated, with a long battery life and remote storage capability. It wasn't hospital-approved, highly illegal to use here, but their situation was far beyond standard procedures. The following night, Claire waited until the deepest point of the graveyard shift, when the halls were deserted, and even the security monitors likely displayed scenes of utter stillness. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, as she slipped on thin gloves, the miniature device feeling impossibly heavy in her trembling hand. She moved with practiced quietness, using a small stool she'd discreetly brought in earlier, every rustle of her uniform, every soft click, as she carefully eased the ceiling panel open, just enough sounded amplified in the silence. Her fingers fumbled slightly as she positioned the tiny lens, angling it towards the area near the medication fridge. She activated it, the minuscule indicator light blinking once before going dark, sliding the panel back into place, ensuring no visible trace remained. Took an eternity. She stepped down, forcing herself to breathe evenly, wiping away a bead of sweat that trickled down her temple, despite the room's cool temperature. Now all they could do was wait. 2 agonizing nights passed. Claire went through the motions, her anxiety, a constant churning knot in her stomach. She exchanged only the briefest, most necessary communications with Alexander, terrified of another near miss, with Marcus, or worse, Eleanor. Early on the 3rd morning, just before the pre-dawn shift change brought more staff activity, Claire knew it was time. Repeating the nerve-wracking process, she retrieved the device, her fingers closing around its small, cool form, with immense relief. She slipped it into her pocket, her mind already racing ahead to find a secure place to review the contents. Later locked in a deserted staff bathroom during her break, Claire plugged the device into a small encrypted tablet she kept hidden in her locker. Her breath hitched as the recording began to play. Silence at first, then the soft click of the suite door opening. Footsteps getting too close, Marcus Thorne's voice, muttered, laced with anxiety. That nurse Claire Miller. She watches everything, asks too many questions. Let her ask, Eleanor's cool, unruffled voice replied. Claire could almost picture her waving a dismissive hand. As long as she doesn't start writing official reports or contacting anyone outside, she's irrelevant. Besides Marcus, this will all be over soon. Claire leaned closer, straining to hear every word. We give it another week, perhaps 10 days. Eleanor continued calmly. Let Dr. Peterson document a lack of significant neurological improvement. Then we file the DNR motion with the Ethics Committee. But Alexander has no living will, Marcus protested. A DNR request, now won't that raise red flags? We'll claim he expressed verbal directives to me, before the accident," Eleanor said smoothly. "A private conversation. Who can disprove it? I've already had preliminary discussions with the hospital's legal liaison. They're sympathetic, eager to resolve this unfortunate situation quietly and avoid any prolonged legal battles over his estate." And Finch Marcus pressed. "He won't just stand by." "Robert Finch," Eleanor sighed. A hint of steel entering her voice is being handled. "His access has been restricted. He'll be formally excluded from the next estate planning meeting due to a conflict of interest we are manufacturing. By the time he realizes what's truly happening, it will be too late." Then came the words that sent ice water through Claire's veins. "All that remains," Eleanor concluded, her voice dropping slightly, "is to maintain his current state. Perhaps even increase the sedative dosage slightly, if needed, citing minor agitation and Marcus. Once the DNR is approved and the transition paperwork is ready, I want that nurse gone. Immediately. She's seen too much. Knows too much." The recording ended. Claire sat in stunned silence, the tablet trembling in her hands. It was worse than she'd imagined. Cold-blooded, calculated, and terrifyingly close to succeeding. They weren't just trying to steal his money. They were actively planning to let him die and dispose of anyone who got in their way. Her hands shaking, she saved the recording multiple times. To an encrypted USB drive hidden in her shoe, to a secure cloud server only she could access, and onto the locked tablet itself. That night she relayed the horrifying contents to Alexander, using their painstaking code. She saw the flicker of pain and fury in his eyes, quickly masked, replaced by steely resolve. Claire whispered, her laptop open on her knees, ready to draft a message. "Who can we possibly trust with this?" Alexander blinked once, paused, then blinked again. Claire frowned. 2 blinks. "What does—" She quickly grabbed the small notebook where she kept track of names they'd discussed, names Alexander had slowly confirmed or denied relevance for. Her eyes scanned the short list. At the very top, heavily emphasized with multiple yes signals from previous sessions, Robert Finch Alexander's longtime personal attorney, known for his fierce loyalty and discretion, the man Eleanor was actively trying to sideline Robert Finch. Claire breathed understanding dawning. Of course, he's the only one. She looked at Alexander for confirmation. He blinked once slowly. Yes. With trembling fingers, Claire typed a brief, urgent message attaching the encrypted recording file. Subject: urgent matter. Regarding Alexander Vance. Mr. Finch. My name is Claire Miller, Mr. Vance's current registered nurse. I apologize for this unconventional contact method, but circumstances are extreme. I believe you are one of the few people who has always acted in Mr. Vance's best interests. He is not unresponsive, as publicly stated. He is conscious and aware. What is happening here is not medical care. It is a crime. This attached recording contains irrefutable proof. Alexander needs your help. Urgently. Please help us. Claire Miller. She hesitated for only a second, took a deep breath, and hit send. The email vanished into the digital ether. She reached out her hand, covering Alexander's. They won't win, she whispered fiercely. He managed the faintest pressure in return, a bare whisper of movement against her skin. But in that moment, it felt like a shout of defiance. Hours later, huddled in the dim light of the nurse's lounge during another break, her phone buzzed silently. An encrypted message notification. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was from an unfamiliar, secure address. Subject: urgent matter. Regarding Alexander Vance, Miss Miller. Message and attachment received and understood. Do not speak to anyone else about this. Do not attempt to contact me again. Through unsecured channels, unless absolutely necessary. Maintain your current routine. Above all, keep him safe. I am on my way, Robert Finch. Tears of relief welled in Claire's eyes. She quickly showed the message to Alexander, angling the phone so only he could see. They weren't alone anymore. The game had irrevocably changed. Robert Finch was coming. Now it was truly time to fight back. It happened on a Tuesday morning, bathed in the deceptive calm of early daylight. Claire was adjusting Alexander's oxygen monitor, her movements practiced and quiet when she saw it. A flutter beneath his eyelids. Not the involuntary twitch she'd grown accustomed to, but something more deliberate. Her breath caught. She leaned closer, her heart suddenly loud in the still room. "Alexander," she whispered, hardly daring to hope. His eyelids fluttered again, then slowly, hesitantly opened, not just a sliver this time, but fully hazy at first, then focusing the deep hazel irises, finding hers. It wasn't the blank stare of sedation or the fleeting signal of their secret code. It was him, looking at her, truly seeing her. A wave of emotion so potent it felt like a physical blow washed over Claire. Tears welled, blurring her vision before she could stop them. "Hi," she managed, her voice choked, barely audible. You're really back." He tried to speak a rough, guttural sound, emerging from his dry throat. Claire gently placed a finger to her own lips. "Shh, don't rush. It's okay. We'll take it slow. You're safe now." Over the next few hours, under the guise of routine nursing care, Claire helped him take sips of water, assessed his new level of responsiveness, and kept up a quiet, reassuring monologue, all while maintaining a facade of normalcy for anyone who might glance into the room. The true miracle, however, was happening in the silent spaces between the routine. The way his gaze followed her around the room, the weak but definite pressure of his hand when she held it, the dawning awareness in his eyes. Later that evening, after her shift officially ended, but long before she intended to leave, Claire returned with a thermos of chamomile tea and a small notebook. "Thought we might try talking," she said softly, pulling a chair close to his bedside. "Real words this time, if you feel up to it." Alexander managed a faint smile, the first genuine one she'd seen. His voice, when he tried again, was raspy, broken from disuse, but he formed a single clear syllable. Claire laughed, a bright, relieved sound that echoed slightly in the room. "Tea it is." She poured him a small cup, helping him hold it. They talked in short bursts over the next hour, interspersed with long periods of comfortable silence. His voice slowly gained a little strength, though it remained rough. He listened intently as she told him about Robert Finch's message, how the lawyer was mobilizing, preparing for the right moment. "He's coming," Claire assured him. "He has the proof. You'll get your company back, Alexander. Your life back, Justice. You just have to hold on a little longer." Alexander didn't reply immediately, his gaze thoughtful. Then softly, huskily, he rasped, "You held on for me." Claire nodded, suddenly, finding it hard to meet his intense gaze. A beat passed the atmosphere in the room, shifting charged with unspoken emotion. His hand, still weak but more purposeful, now reached slowly for hers across the small space between the bed and her chair. She took it without hesitation, his skin surprisingly warm against hers. "You saved me, Claire," he whispered, his voice gaining a fraction more strength, raw with sincerity. She exhaled sharply, a tide of emotion rushing forward. Relief, fear, tenderness, confusion. "I didn't know what I was doing at first," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "I just knew I couldn't stand by and watch something cruel happen, but the more I sat here, the more I talked to you, even when I thought you couldn't hear, the more I learned." She looked down at their joined hands, unable to continue for a moment. "I started to care about the man I sensed you were. Not the name, not the money, just you." Alexander's eyes softened Claire. She shook her head, blinking rapidly. Tears threatened again. "I know this is unprofessional," she rushed on, needing to say it all, now that the dam had broken. "I know I shouldn't feel this way, or say this now, but I think I'm falling for you, Alexander. And I hate it." Her voice cracked, "because this is the worst possible time you've been through hell. You need to heal to fight back. You don't need someone like me, complicating things." His grip on her hand tightened a surprising strength in his recovering fingers. "Complicating things." His voice was low but clear, drawing her gaze back up to meet his. "Claire, you're the only thing that's made any of this make sense." Her breath caught. He offered another weak but incredibly real smile. "You didn't complicate anything. You brought me back." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And for what it's worth, the feeling is very mutual." Claire stared at him, speechless. Then a tear escaped, followed by another. But this time, a watery chuckle broke through. "This is insane," she whispered, wiping at her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan. "I'm crying over my patient. I'm not your patient." He countered softly, his thumb gently brushing her knuckles. "Not anymore." A comfortable silence fell, warm and full of unspoken understanding. Something profound had shifted between them, solidifying in the quiet intimacy of the hospital room. 2 days later, Robert Finch arrived. Not through the main entrance, but discreetly via a service elevator, arranged by Claire. The lawyer was a man whose calm demeanor couldn't entirely mask the sharp intelligence in his eyes or the coiled energy beneath his tailored suit. He listened intently as Claire recounted the events, his expression growing grimmer with each detail, occasionally nodding as Alexander, now propped up in bed and speaking more clearly, confirmed key points. He reviewed the recording. Claire provided his lips, tightening into a thin line. Monsters Finch breathed his voice tight with controlled fury after viewing the evidence. Absolute monsters. But they were sloppy, arrogant. "This recording, this is everything we need." They spent the next hour meticulously planning. Finch outlined the legal strategy: restraining orders, contacting loyal board members, preparing for an emergency shareholder meeting. But Alexander had another idea. "No," Alexander said, his voice steadier, now infused with returning authority. "A quiet legal maneuver isn't enough. They tried to erase me in the shadows. I want to expose them in the light. Eleanor is planning some sort of press conference, isn't she? Trying to solidify her control." Finch nodded slowly. "Tomorrow morning. Ostensibly to update the public and the board on your tragic prognosis and the necessary transition of leadership." "Perfect," Alexander said, a predatory glint entering his eyes. "Then that's where we strike. Let them set the stage for their own downfall." The following morning, the hospital's largest conference room buzzed with hushed anticipation. Board members in expensive suits mingled awkwardly with a handful of select reporters. Promised an exclusive Eleanor Vance stood at the podium, a vision of poised grief in a cream-colored blazer, Marcus Thorne hovering just behind her, a smug smirk playing on his lips. "Thank you all for coming during this difficult time," Eleanor began, her voice smooth and somber. "As you know, our family, and indeed the entire Vance Corporation, has faced an unspeakable hardship with my stepson Alexander's tragic condition. His prognosis sadly remains unchanged. Therefore, after much deliberation, and with the support of key stakeholders, we are here today to discuss the necessary transfer of temporary executive control to ensure stability and continuity. Right on cue, the double doors at the back of the room swung open dramatically. All heads turned. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Alexander Vance walked in. He moved slowly, deliberately, using a simple, elegant cane for support, but his posture was erect. His gaze sharp and commanding. Dressed impeccably in a tailored charcoal suit, he radiated an undeniable aura of power. Reborn Robert Finch walked beside him, carrying a tablet. Cameras flashed. Reporters scrambled. Marcus Thorne went deathly pale, his smirk vanishing as if wiped away. Eleanor froze, mid-sentence, her mask of composure shattering her eyes wide with disbelief and horror. Alexander didn't speak until he reached the center aisle, his footsteps echoing slightly in the stunned silence. He stopped, leaned slightly on his cane, and fixed his gaze directly on his stepmother. "Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying easily across the room. "I see you started without me. You're awake," Eleanor stammered, her voice suddenly high-pitched, losing its practiced smoothness. "But," how Dr. Peterson said. Alexander raised a hand, cutting her off. "Save it." He turned his gaze, sweeping over the shocked faces of the board members and reporters. "I've been conscious for some time now. There was a brief coma. Yes, induced by trauma and other factors." His eyes flickered towards Eleanor and Marcus. "But when I regained awareness, I realized something was terribly wrong." He nodded curtly to Robert Finch. Finch stepped forward and without a word tapped the screen of the tablet. The room filled with the chillingly clear voices of Eleanor Vance and Marcus Thorne, captured by Claire's hidden device. "Keep him sedated. File the DNR motion. Finch is being handled. I want that nurse gone. She's seen too much." Gasps turned into murmurs of outrage. One elderly board member sank into his chair, covering his face with his hand. Another stood up abruptly, pointing a trembling finger at Eleanor. Marcus lunged forward, sputtering. That's taken out of context." "It's manipulated." Alexander's voice sliced through the rising chaos, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "Manipulated. You tried to erase me, Marcus. Both of you." His eyes locked onto Eleanor's. "You wrapped your greed in fake concern and left me helpless, waiting to die. And you almost succeeded." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then his gaze scanned the room until it found Claire standing quietly near the back wall, almost hidden behind a pillar. She looked terrified, but resolute. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, a silent acknowledgement, a grounding force. Alexander turned back to the stunned audience. "You almost succeeded," he repeated, his voice ringing with conviction. "If it hadn't been for one person who saw through the lies, who risked everything to do what was right, who refused to be complicit." He gestured towards the back of the room. "If it hadn't been for her, for Nurse Claire Miller, I wouldn't be standing here today." Every eye in the room swiveled towards Claire, who froze, momentarily caught in the spotlight. Eleanor, recovering slightly, sneered venom dripping from her voice. "You fell for the nurse. How predictable. How common." Alexander looked at his stepmother, not with anger now, but with a chillingly calm pity. "No, Eleanor," he said, quietly but with absolute finality. "I didn't fall for her. I chose her, just as she chose compassion over cruelty, just as she chose truth over your poisonous lies." The room erupted in murmurs. Board members were conferring urgently. Robert Finch stepped forward again, his voice cutting through the noise, announcing pending legal actions, formal investigations by the authorities who were already en route, and the immediate reinstatement of Alexander Vance's full executive authority. Security guards appeared at the doors. Eleanor Vance and Marcus Thorne, their faces masks of disbelief and ruin, were escorted out in stunned silence. Their carefully constructed world crumbling into dust around them, the Vance Empire was safe. Alexander was back, but the battle had only just begun. The immediate aftermath of the boardroom confrontation was a whirlwind of flashing cameras, urgent questions, and the low hum of rapidly spreading scandal. Security efficiently cleared the room, lawyers huddled in tight knots, and hospital administrators scrambled for damage control. Alexander, supported by Robert Finch, was quickly ushered away to a secure location within the hospital complex to deal with the legal formalities and shield him from the burgeoning media frenzy. Claire didn't stay for any of it. The moment Alexander had publicly named her, pointed her out as the heroine of the hour, a wave of panic, cold and sharp, had washed over her, all those eyes turning towards her, the sudden glare of intense scrutiny. It was suffocating. This wasn't her world. The high-stakes corporate battles, the public betrayals, the crushing weight of the Vance name. She felt utterly alien, exposed, and desperately out of her depth. While the chaos swirled elsewhere, Claire slipped away, ducking through a side door and down a quiet service corridor. Her hands shook as she pressed the button for the staff elevator. Her chest tight, with an emotion far more complicated than just fear or relief. Alexander had won. He was safe. He was free. So why did she feel like running away? Later that night, long after the hospital had settled back into a semblance of its usual nocturnal rhythm, Claire found herself in the sterile quiet of the nurse's locker room. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and a heavy sense of uncertainty. She moved automatically quietly, packing her few belongings into her worn tote bag, her spare uniform, the thermos she used for tea, the well-thumbed paperback she'd been reading to Alexander. Finally, she picked up the small, plain notebook, the secret log she had kept hidden. Flipping through its pages, she saw her hurried observations, her fearful suspicions, her whispered confessions spoken into the silence of Alexander's room. This notebook felt like a chronicle of a life that was no longer hers, a connection to a man whose world she could never truly belong to. She knew with a certainty that ached in her bones that her time here was over. She couldn't stay. Not now. Not when the entire world had watched Alexander Vance point her out. Headlines were already spinning. The heroic nurse, the unlikely savior. Others she knew would inevitably whisper about ulterior motives, about gold digging, about a naive nurse caught up in a billionaire's drama. She was none of those things. She was just Claire Miller, tired, overwhelmed, and hopelessly in love with a man whose life was a universe away from her own. And she had no idea what to do with any of it. With a heavy sigh, she tucked the notebook deep into her bag, zipped it shut, and took one last look around the anonymous locker room. Time to go. Time to disappear back into her own quiet life before she got swept away completely. She was just turning towards the door, keycard in hand, when the elevator at the end of the short hall dinged softly. The doors slid open. Claire. She froze her back to him, her heart leaping into her throat. She turned slowly. Alexander Vance stood there. No cane this time. He looked tired, lines of strain still etched around his eyes, but he stood steady on his own feet, dressed simply in dark trousers and a soft sweater, a stark contrast to the power suit he'd worn earlier. His gaze was locked on hers, intense and searching. She inhaled sharply. "Alexander, you shouldn't be walking around alone. You need to rest." I'm not alone, he said quietly, taking a step towards her, closing the distance between them. I came to find you. Claire looked down at her bag, then back at him, her throat tight. I was just leaving, I know. His voice was soft, understanding. He stopped a few feet away from her. That's why I had to come now. He reached into the pocket of his sweater and pulled something out. The small plain notebook. Claire gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. She'd forgotten she'd left it on the bedside table earlier in the chaos, intending to retrieve it before leaving. You left this, Alexander said, his expression unreadable as he held it out to her. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Heat flooded Claire's cheeks. That wasn't meant for anyone else to read, he finished gently. I know he didn't hand it back immediately. Instead, his thumb brushed across the worn cover. But after everything, after you trusted me enough to keep this, I needed to understand. He opened it carefully, his eyes scanning a page near the middle. I read this part, he said, his voice lowering, becoming more intimate the night you told me. You thought you were falling for me, and you hated it, because you were scared. Because you thought I'd see you differently. Once I was back. He closed the notebook and finally looked up, his gaze meeting hers, directly holding it. I don't. Claire. She stared at him, her heart pounding, unsure what he meant. I didn't fall for the nurse, he clarified, taking another small step closer. I fell for the person who sat beside me when I was more ghost than man. The person who argued with doctors who dismissed her concerns. The person who read stories aloud in an empty room. The person who chose to believe I was worth saving, even when she thought no one would ever know. His voice was thick with emotion. The person who, despite everything she'd clearly been through herself, he gestured vaguely towards the notebook, still had the courage to fight for a stranger. Tears welled in Claire's eyes again, blurring his image. Alexander. He stepped closer still, his voice barely above a whisper, earnest and certain. I've spent a lifetime surrounded by people who valued my name, my money, my influence. You saw me. When I had nothing else to offer, you were the first. She shook her head, a tear escaping, tracing a path down her cheek. I didn't mean to get involved. It just happened. I know, he interrupted softly. But I did mean to. I mean it now. A fragile silence stretched between them, filled only by the low hum of the hospital ventilation. Then gently, hesitantly, he asked the question that hung unspoken in the air. Will you stay, Claire? He held her gaze, his own eyes filled with a vulnerability she'd never expected to see in Alexander Vance. Not here. Not as my nurse. Just stay with me. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, the sound trembling in the quiet room. All her doubts, her fears, the chasm between their worlds. It all seemed to rush through her mind. Alexander saw the conflict in her eyes. He offered a small, self-deprecating smile, a touch of the dry wit she'd glimpsed before, surfacing even now. Look, he said, his tone a tempting lightness. I've gotten used to you being here, arguing about my physiotherapy schedule. If you leave now, who knows? I might just fake a coma again out of sheer boredom. Despite the tears brimming, a small laugh escaped Claire's lips. It broke the tension just enough. He grew serious again, his eyes pleading softly. Stay, please. Let us figure out whatever us is together. She looked at him, truly looked at the man standing before her, stripped of his corporate armor, offering her a future she couldn't have imagined, a future built not on wealth or status, but on the fragile, hard-won trust they had forged in the darkest of times. Her lips trembled. All the reasons to run seemed insignificant compared to the one overwhelming reason to stay. "Okay," she whispered, the single word filled with tears, hope, and terrifying uncertainty. "Okay, Alexander, I'll stay." He didn't move immediately, just let out a slow breath, relief washing over his features. Then he did something he hadn't done since before the crash, something that felt more real than any business deal he'd ever closed. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached his eyes, and slowly, tentatively, Claire stepped forward, closing the small distance between them, moving not towards a billionaire, but towards the man she loved, towards the still beating truth of whatever future they might build together. One word, one touch, one shared breath at a time. 1 year, 12 months since the dramatic confrontation that had rocked the foundations of the Vance Empire and splashed across national headlines. The ensuing legal battles had been swift and decisive, thanks to Robert Finch's meticulous preparation and the undeniable evidence Claire had risked everything to obtain. The scales of justice, often perceived as slow and indifferent, had weighed heavily against Eleanor Vance and Marcus Thorne. Stripped of their wealth, their social standing obliterated. Their names became synonymous with greed and betrayal. Eleanor, her cool composure finally cracking under relentless cross-examination, received a lengthy sentence in a federal women's prison. Upstate reports occasionally filtered out, depicting a woman lost in bitter, isolated silence, the luxurious trappings she craved replaced by harsh, institutional grey. Marcus, whose arrogance and panicked attempts at electronic manipulation had left a digital trail Finch easily exploited, fared little better, sentenced to 15 years without parole in a medium security facility. Their legacies weren't just tarnished, they were eradicated footnotes in a story that had thankfully turned towards healing. Alexander Vance, true to the quiet desire for peace he'd confessed to Claire, chose not to reclaim the throne of his family's hotel empire in the way everyone expected. He appointed a trusted executive team, overseen by the ever-vigilant Robert Finch, to manage the day-to-day operations of Vance Hotels. His focus shifted entirely. Alongside Claire pouring his energy and considerable resources into a new venture, he established the non-profit Claire Miller Foundation. Claire had initially resisted having it named after her, blushing furiously and insisting it wasn't necessary. But Alexander had been adamant. "You didn't just save my life, Claire," he'd told her firmly but gently. "You reminded me what a life should be about. Your courage deserves to be the cornerstone." The Foundation's mission was twofold: to provide legal aid and advocacy for vulnerable patients facing medical negligence or abuse, and to offer support systems for healthcare whistleblowers who dared to speak out against wrongdoing. Its first pilot program, fittingly, was launched in partnership with the very hospital where Alexander had been held captive under a completely new, reform-minded administration. Their work wasn't without challenges. 6 months after the Foundation's launch, a cynical article surfaced in a notorious gossip magazine, heavily implying the non-profit was merely a PR stunt, a way for Alexander to launder his image funded by guilt rather than conviction. Anonymous sources questioned Claire's qualifications, painting her as a naive opportunist. The attack was insidious, clearly orchestrated by lingering sympathizers of Eleanor or business rivals seeking to exploit the past scandal. For a moment, the old pressures threatened to resurface. But this time, Alexander wasn't alone. He and Claire faced the challenge head-on. They didn't issue angry denials. Instead, they held a quiet press conference, not in a corporate boardroom, but in the modest community center, where the foundation held its support group meetings. They presented transparent financial reports. They let 2 individuals the foundation had already helped, a senior citizen wrongly denied care, a young nurse who had reported unsafe practices, share their own stories. Their quiet dignity and heartfelt gratitude spoke volumes more than any defense Alexander or Claire could have mounted. The smear campaign fizzled out, ultimately serving only to highlight the genuine impact the foundation was already making. It was a small victory, but it solidified their shared purpose and resilience. To escape the lingering pressures of the city and the demands of their new work, they found refuge in a place Claire had discovered online. A simple, unassuming house nestled in the high desert canyons of New Mexico. No infinity pool, no helipad, just adobe walls warmed by the sun, vast skies and profound silence. They called it their desert retreat and escaped there every few months. No emails, no calls, no Vance Corporation, business, just Alexander, Claire, and peace. One evening, as the setting sun bled fiery orange and deep violet across the horizon, they hiked a narrow trail winding up the canyon behind the house. Claire laughed as Alexander paused, leaning against a pinyon pine, pretending to be dramatically out of breath. Heir to a global hotel empire, she teased easily, catching her breath beside him. Conqueror of corporate villains, and you're winded after a 15-minute walk. He grinned, wiping mock sweat from his brow. Hey, I almost died, remember? Cut me some slack, he winked. Besides, walking slowly means I get to walk beside you longer. She rolled her eyes playfully, but bumped his shoulder gently with hers. At the top of the trail, a flat overlook offered a breathtaking panorama of the painted desert stretching for miles under the twilight sky. The air was cool and smelled of sagebrush and dry earth. As Claire turned to soak in the view, Alexander reached into the pocket of his worn denim jacket. She turned back just as he knelt, not with grand ceremony, but with quiet sincerity on the dusty ground. Her breath caught in her throat. He held out not a velvet box, but simply his hand. Resting in his palm was a ring unlike anything she would have expected from Alexander Vance, the billionaire. It was a simple band of warm rose gold, cradling a smooth, earth-toned cabochon of desert jasper, polished by nature and time not cut into facets. It felt warm, natural, real, like her. Like them, I wanted to do this somewhere. Quiet, Alexander said softly, his voice husky with emotion, his eyes locked on hers somewhere. Real, somewhere, like the place where I finally started to find myself again, where I found you. Tears welled in Claire's eyes as he looked up at her, his heart bare in his gaze. Claire Miller. He began, his voice trembling slightly now. You didn't just save my life. You saved everything that matters. My hope, my belief in goodness, my future. Will you marry me? Not the millionaire, not the former patient, just me. She didn't hesitate, dropping to her knees beside him on the trail. Heedless of the dust, she wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Yes, she whispered against his skin, the word muffled, but absolute. Oh, Alexander, yes. Always yes. They married 3 months later, not in a grand ballroom or a historic cathedral, but in the simple, blooming garden behind the Foundation's first community clinic. No press, no paparazzi, no society pages. Just Robert Finch beaming as Alexander's best man, Claire's few close friends, her tearful parents, and a small gathering of people whose lives had been touched by the Foundation, their chosen family. At the end of the short, heartfelt ceremony, as sunlight streamed through the leaves, Claire looked out at the small crowd. Her gaze landed on a young woman in nursing student scrubs, holding hands with her elderly grandmother, both smiling through happy tears. Claire recognized her, the girl who had sent a frightened anonymous email to the foundation months ago whispering, "I think something's wrong at my hospital, but I'm scared to speak up." Now here she was, pursuing her own dream, a testament to the ripple effect of courage and compassion. Claire's heart stuttered with a profound sense of rightness. This felt more valuable than any empire. Later that evening, as lanterns glowed softly in the courtyard and gentle laughter echoed around them, Alexander and Claire sat together on a simple wooden bench, hands entwined. He leaned his head against hers, breathing in the scent of her hair and the cool night air. "Do you think," he asked quietly, "they'll ever forget what happened, Eleanor Marcus? The whole scandal?" Claire smiled softly, looking out at the gathering. "Maybe eventually. Some parts." She paused. He turned slightly to look at her. "Do you want them to forget?" He asked. "No," she said thoughtfully, meeting his gaze. "Not entirely. Not if remembering reminds people that good people still fight back. That truth can win, even when it seems buried. That love, real love, can outlast even the deepest betrayal." Alexander kissed her forehead, gently, as the first stars began to prick the darkening sky. They sat in comfortable silence, no longer defined as survivors or headlines or heirs or heroes. Just two people, whole free, finally undeniably home. Sometimes healing begins in the silence. Sometimes love begins with earned trust. And sometimes the bravest, most profound thing you can do is choose to believe in the light within someone when the rest of the world has only seen their shadows. Alexander and Claire's journey was a quiet testament. No amount of power, wealth, or calculated cruelty could ever truly extinguish the steady, resilient glow of compassion or the enduring strength found in simply choosing to care. Alexander and Claire's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest strength isn't found in power or fortune, but in the quiet courage to trust, to care, even when the world seems filled with shadows. How often do we look but fail to truly see the person hidden behind the assumptions we make? Finding your way back from betrayal, learning to trust again. It's a journey many of us understand, isn't it? Their path shows that even in silence, compassion can speak volumes, and healing can bloom in the most unexpected places. This journey from suspicion and isolation to trust and connection truly moved us, and we believe every story holds a spark that can connect us all. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Claire's quiet bravery or Alexander's difficult transformation resonated most with you? Share your reflections in the comments below. Let's build a community around these meaningful stories. If their journey touched your heart today, please give this video a like, and if you feel someone else might find strength or hope in their story, please consider sharing it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next emotional journey together, exploring the strength of the human spirit. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, even when things seem darkest, the simple, honest courage to care can truly change everything. We'll see you in the next story.